Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. After declaring COVID-19 as a notified disaster, the government of India has started to put contingency plans in place and the entire disaster management machinery has been activated. So this article provides us an opportunity to understand the higher level institutions in India's disaster management architecture. This flowchart depicts the national level institutions that are a part of India's disaster management framework. See, the responsibility for managing disasters lies with the state governments. And at the national level, the nodal ministry for dealing with disasters is the Ministry of Home Affairs. But if a disaster of a severe nature occurs, and if the capacity of the state government is overwhelmed, then the central government comes to the aid and assistance of the state governments. In order to provide for this aid and assistance, a number of national level institutions have been set up under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. This includes the National Disaster Management Authority, the National Crisis Management Committee, the National Executive Committee, and the National Disaster Response Force or the NDRF. See, the Disaster Management Act provides for a three-tier structure for dealing with disasters, and it creates institutions at the national level, state level, and the district level. Amongst all these institutions, the highest level decision-making body for disaster management is the NDMA. The Prime Minister acts as the chairperson of the NDMA, and he gets to appoint a maximum of 9 members. One of these members is appointed as the vice chairman of NDMA, and he basically acts as the functional head of the NDMA. The vice chairperson is also given the rank of a cabinet minister, whereas the other members of the NDMA, they are given the ranks of Minister of State. As the highest decision-making authority, the NDMA is responsible for laying down the policies, plans and guidelines for disaster management. It is also responsible for coordinating their enforcement and implementation by working with the state and district disaster management authorities. So it is the NDMA which has to approve the National Disaster Management Plan. Such a plan was approved in 2016, and in fact, this flowchart has been drawn from the National Disaster Management Plan of 2016. The NDMA also approves the disaster management plans of respective ministries and departments of Government of India. Next, we have the National Crisis Management Committee. This is headed by the Cabinet Secretary, and it also includes secretaries of key ministries which have been given specific responsibilities under disaster management. For example, the Union Home Secretary, the Union Finance Secretary, the Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, they are included under the National Crisis Management Committee. The responsibility of this institution is to work out the overall command, control and coordination of disaster response. When a disaster of a severe nature occurs, its responsibility is to work out specific strategies and action plans as per the guidelines that have been established in the National Disaster Management Plan. Next, we have the National Executive Committee, which is headed by the Union Home Secretary. It also includes the secretaries from all the key ministries and departments of the Government of India. Its main responsibility is to assist the NDMA in the discharge of its functions. So it is the National Executive Committee which prepares the National Disaster Management Plan. And this plan has to be approved by the NDMA. So this was already done in 2016. Now that we have a National Disaster Management Plan in place, the responsibility of the National Executive Committee is to enforce and implement these provisions. So it is the National Executive Committee which is responsible for implementing the strategy and the action plan that has been developed by the National Crisis Management Committee. So it has the powers to monitor the implementation of the disaster management plan by all the ministries, departments and agencies of the Government of India. It can also issue directions to central and state institutions to provide for adequate resources while dealing with a disaster. It is also responsible for monitoring the extent of a disaster and for monitoring the disaster response of the disaster management authorities during a disaster. As a part of this responsibility, the National Executive Committee coordinates with various institutions such as the armed forces, the Central Armed Police Forces, the NDRF, the IMD or the Indian Meteorological Department, and as well as with other early warning and monitoring agencies. Finally, we have the National Disaster Response Force or the NDRF. It is a specialized force that has been constituted under the Disaster Management Act of 2005 in order to provide for a specialist response during a disaster. With regard to the disaster management architecture, it directly comes under the NDMA, and it currently comprises of around 12 battalions. This specialist disaster response force has been organized on paramilitary lines, and its personnel have been drawn on the basis of deputation from existing Central Armed Police Forces of the Home Ministry such as the BSF, the CRPF, CISF, ITBP, and the SSB. Members of the NDRF receive specialized training and they carry specialized equipment so that they can provide for a professional disaster response during the times of a disaster. So these battalions of the NDRF are made up of self-contained units comprising of engineers, technicians, electricians, dog squads, doctors, etc. The NDRF has been tasked with providing disaster response for both natural and man-made disasters. And each battalion of the NDRF specializes in a few types of disasters. Out of these 12 battalions, there are 4 battalions of the NDRF which specialize in responding to CBRN disasters, that is chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear disasters. Since CBRN disasters are an outcome of war, terrorism or industrial accident, they tend to have national security implications, and hence in the case of CBRN disasters, even the Cabinet Committee on Security gets involved in disaster management. The Cabinet Committee on Security is headed by the Prime Minister, and it includes 4 top cabinet ministers, that is the Home Minister, the Finance Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Defense Minister. Then coming back to our discussion on the NDRF, the 12 battalions of the NDRF have been stationed across the country in different states based on the specialization of each battalion and also based on the vulnerability of each region to specific disasters. So accordingly, these battalions have been stationed in Assam, West Bengal, Odisha, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Punjab, NCR region, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh, UP and Arunachal Pradesh. Along with their specific deployment, their jurisdiction and operational area has also been clearly defined. So according to this article, the NDRF has been training the staff and personnel of CISF and the Bureau of Immigration who are deployed at airports and land ports on the protocols that they need to follow to tackle the coronavirus outbreak. Then the Prime Minister-led NDMA has been working with the state and district disaster management authorities for implementing a coordinated response. And the National Crisis Management Committee, headed by the Cabinet Secretary, is working out a strategy to deal with the outbreak. And the National Executive Committee, headed by the Union Home Secretary, is ensuring the implementation and monitoring of these policies. Apart from this, the Union Textiles Ministry has been directed by the disaster management institutions to take up mass production of protective clothing in order to deal with the shortage of masks, gloves, and other protective clothing. Then the Indian Council of Medical Research and the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare have been directed to expand testing by increasing the number of testing labs. Next, on page number 10, we have an editorial and as well as a column which evaluates the nomination of former Chief Justice of India Ranjan Gogoi to the Rajya Sabha. These 2 articles are evaluating the propriety of the government's decision to offer lucrative postings to judges immediately after their retirement. It is also evaluating the propriety on the part of the judge for accepting such postings and nominations. Because see, when judges are offered such lucrative post-retirement benefits by the government, that too immediately after their retirement, then it raises the question of conflict of interest. In the constitutional scheme of things, separation of powers between the judiciary, executive and legislature is seen as a part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. The Constitution provides for an independent judiciary that is responsible for holding the executive and as well as the legislature accountable. especially the higher judiciary, functions as a constitutional court and is responsible for securing the fundamental rights of the citizens. And in this regard, it is generally seen to be passing judgments against the government and against the legislature. The Constitution has envisioned the judiciary to act as a restraining force on the acts of omission and commission of the executive and the legislature. So when this is the constitutional arrangement, if retired judges accept postings and appointments from the government, that too immediately after their retirement, then it raises the question of conflict of interest. And such decisions are also questioned on the grounds of propriety because it gives an impression to the public that there has been a quid pro quo arrangement between the judiciary and the government. It gives the public an impression that there has been a give and take arrangement between the judiciary and the government, and this undermines judicial authority and judicial independence. See, when judges are dealing with cases where the government itself is a litigant, if they go on to accept post-retirement postings from the same government, then it definitely raises the question of conflict of interest and quid pro quo arrangement. See, Ranjan Gogoi had a very controversial tenure as the Chief Justice of India. He dealt with politically sensitive cases such as the Rafale controversy, electoral bonds, Article 370, etc. He also headed the bench which delivered the landmark Ayodhya verdict. He also dealt with the NRC exercise in Assam, and he also faced charges of sexual harassment. In most of these cases, when the judgment has gone in favor of the government, and if the same judge is seen to be accepting post-retirement benefits from the same government, then it definitely undermines judicial independence in the eyes of the public. See, the argument is not to accuse Ranjan Gogoi or the government of engineering these verdicts in return for post-retirement benefits. But the argument is to question the propriety of the government's decision and to question the propriety on the part of Ranjan Gogoi to accept the offer, because it has cast an unnecessary doubt on these judgments which were delivered by Ranjan Gogoi as the Chief Justice of India. So it is this impression in the eyes of the public which undermines judicial independence and judicial authority. The government on its part has justified the decision by citing past precedents. See, in the past, there have been a few instances where retired judges have accepted such post-retirement appointments. For example, take the case of Chief Justice Rangnath Mishra. He headed the commission which was inquiring into the role of the government during the anti-Sikh riots. The Rangnath Mishra Commission had given a clean chit to the Congress government, and a few years later, he was nominated as a Rajya Sabha member. Then Justice Baharul Islam was facilitated by the Congress to move between the Supreme Court and the Parliament, and he even contested an election on the party's ticket, even after he had given a clean chit to the Congress government in Bihar in a corruption scandal. There have also been other instances where retired judges have been appointed as governors, ambassadors, etc. So the argument is that this arrangement violates the doctrine of separation of powers and it undermines judicial authority and judicial independence. The editorial suggests that judges of the Supreme Court should commit themselves to reject any post-retirement benefits that might be offered by the government in order to set an example. In fact, a number of judges have made it clear that they would never accept post-retirement benefits from the government. Take the example of Justice Chandrachud. He has made it clear that he would not be accepting any post-retirement benefits from the government. But there is also the argument that by bringing retired judges into key positions, the government would be able to utilize their valuable expertise in policy making. This argument is definitely valid. But such postings and appointments need to be made only after the retired judge has served a certain cooling off period and not immediately after their retirement. Now let's take up a column from page number 11 in which the writer argues that a recent judgment of the Supreme Court violates minority rights. But first, in order to understand the significance of minority rights, we need to look at the statements of Lord Acton and Sardar Patel. Lord Acton had stated that if we have to judge whether a country is really free, then we need to look at the amount of security enjoyed by the minorities. Sardar Patel had said, independent India's mission is to satisfy every interest and safeguard the interests of all the minorities to their satisfaction. In this spirit, Article 29 and Article 30 were included in the Constitution, which provides a set of fundamental rights to religious and linguistic minorities. Under Article 30, minority communities enjoy a fundamental right to establish and administer minority educational institutions. In fact, in the landmark Keswananda Bharati case, which defined the basic structure concept, minority rights were held to be an integral part of the basic structure of the Constitution. The writer says that this fundamental right has been violated by a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court, which was looking into the constitutional validity of a couple of legislations of the West Bengal government that was seeking to take away the autonomy of madrasas. This case dealt with the West Bengal Board of Madrasa Education Act of 1994 and the West Bengal Madrasa Service Commission Act of 2008. Both these legislations were seeking to take away the autonomy of madrasas in the appointment of teachers, and they provide for the appointment of teachers by a board that is constituted by the government. This basically amounts to a direct role for the government in the administration of a minority education institution, and according to the writer, this violates Article 30. He justifies this argument by referring to a few important cases. In 2014, the Calcutta High Court had struck down these two legislations, and it considered them to be violative of the fundamental right that is guaranteed under Article 30. The writer also points out that unlike other fundamental rights, Article 30 does not contain any reasonable restrictions, and hence, according to him, Article 30 is an absolute right. So he argues that the state cannot take away or dilute this right in the name of reasonable restrictions. He also brings up the judgment of the Supreme Court in the TMA Pi Foundation case of 2003, in which the Supreme Court had defined the word administer under Article 30. In this case, the Supreme Court had interpreted the word administer to include a wide set of administrative rights. So this means that minority communities not only have a fundamental right to establish a minority educational institution, but they also have the right to administer, that is, the right to select the staff, the teachers, the right to fix the fees, the right to discipline students and teachers, and as well as the right to admit students. So as you can see, in this case, the Supreme Court made it clear that the right to select teachers and staff falls under the administrative rights of the institution, and hence the state cannot regulate or interfere with these rights. Then in the Siddharj Bai case of 1963, the Supreme Court established a dual test to decide upon the conflict between government regulation and rights of minority institutions. In this case, the Supreme Court said that government regulation would be constitutionally valid only if it passes the dual test. So accordingly, government regulation of a minority institution can be considered to be constitutionally valid only if it is seeking to regulate and not destroy the minority character of the institution. And it is constitutionally valid only if the regulation is seeking to promote the minority institution as an effective vehicle of minority education. Then in the Kerala Education Bill case of 1957, the Supreme Court had said that the word choice under Article 30 is the dominant word, and hence minority institutions have a choice to determine the kind of relationship that they want to have with the government. It means that minority institutions have the choice to select teachers, to fix the fees, to discipline the teachers and the students, to admit the students, and as well as to determine the syllabus. So by citing these cases, the writer argues that the recent judgment of the Supreme Court upholding the constitutional validity of these laws is violative of minority rights. Next, in this column on page number 11, the writer argues why we should uphold scientific temper in the light of the ongoing pandemic. See, with regard to COVID-19, we have seen examples where blind faith in religion and tradition has led to the mass propagation of the virus. Take, for example, how a Christian cult group in South Korea contributed to a major outbreak. Similarly, the Shia clerics in the holy city of Qom in Iran have refused to close the shrines and stop prayers, despite the risk of close physical contact between the pilgrims. Then recently in Malaysia, a Sunni Islamic conference which was organized witnessed a large gathering, and hundreds of those who attended the conference were infected with the virus. See, governments around the world have been advocating strict social distancing measures in order to slow down the spread of the virus. But despite this, the blind faith of a few people in religion and tradition has directly contributed to the spread of the disease. Experts believe that something similar is likely to happen in Uttar Pradesh, which is hosting the Ram Navami Mela in Ayodhya next week with the backing of the UP government. Experts have called upon the UP government to cancel the event as it violates the social distancing norms because the congregation of more than 1 lakh pilgrims at this event is likely to promote the spread of the pandemic. Despite this, the UP government has said that it is going ahead with the event, and this not only violates the guidelines of the central government and the World Health Organization, but it also contradicts the advisories of the state government itself. So in this context, the writer says that faith cannot be allowed to override public health, and he calls upon the central government to step in and cancel the event in the interest of public health. The same argument can be made with regard to the promotion of questionable cures by a few organizations. A few organizations have been claiming and even organizing events that the consumption of cow urine and cow dung is going to provide immunity against the disease. Similar questionable cures are being propagated by few alternate systems of medicine. So during this time of crisis, the society and the government have a responsibility to uphold scientific temper over blind faith. Now let's take up the practice questions. Which of the following statements are correct? The International Labour Organization is a specialized agency of the UN. It provides representation only for the governments of UN member states. World Employment and Social Outlook is a flagship report of the ILO. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect because the International Labour Organization provides representation not only for the governments but also for employers and employees from all the UN member states. So the correct answer is option C, 1 and 3 only. This question has been asked because we have a related article on the additional page. According to this article, the International Labour Organization has come out with an estimate, and as per this estimate, global unemployment is going to increase and around 25 million jobs might be lost due to the economic impact of coronavirus. Now let's take up the next question. An elected member of the parliament or legislature can be disqualified on which of the following grounds? If he holds any office of profit, if he is of unsound mind and stands so declared by a competent court, if he is not a citizen of India, if he is an undischarged insolvent, if he is so disqualified under the 10th schedule. All the 5 are correct, so option D is the right answer. These are the grounds for disqualification of an elected member that have been provided under Article 102 of the Constitution. Apart from this, elected members can also be disqualified if a law passed by the Parliament provides for such disqualification. The example for this would be the Representation of People's Act. Under this, elected members can be disqualified on the grounds of corruption according to the Prevention of Corruption Act, on the grounds of conviction in criminal cases, etc. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 12, the Supreme Court has banned a Manipur MLA who was facing disqualification on the grounds of defection from entering the assembly. The Supreme Court has invoked its special powers under Article 142 and it has banned the MLA from entering the assembly until the speaker decides upon his disqualification. Now let's take up the next question. The Defence Procurement Procedure of 2016 was based on the recommendations of which committee? The correct answer is option A, Dhirendra Singh Committee. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 13, the Defence Acquisition Council, headed by the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, has approved an amendment to the Defence Procurement Procedure of 2016. This amendment enables a review of procurement bids by a costing committee. The article also says that the Defence Acquisition Council has approved the procurement of another 83 LCA Tejas aircraft for the Indian Air Force. Now let's take up the next question. If the government offers an attractive voluntary retirement scheme or VRS to PSU employees for reducing the fiscal burden of sick PSUs, then it is referred as Golden Handshake. Option B is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 13. According to this article, the central government has said that it is committed to revive BSNL, which has been under severe financial stress of late. The government has recognized that BSNL provides crucial public service by establishing communication connectivity in remote areas and during times of disaster. So, in order to revive such loss making PSUs and reduce its financial burden, the government promotes a few employees to take up early retirement through an attractive VRS package, which is known as Golden Handshake. Now, let's take up the next practice question. The Abel Prize is awarded for excellence in mathematics. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because, according to this article on page number 14, this year's Abel Prize has been awarded to a couple of probability experts for their exceptional work in the field of mathematics. And also remember that the Abel Prize is considered to be the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for the field of mathematics. Now let us take up a practice question from the 2017 prelims paper. With reference to the role of UN Habitat in the United Nations program working towards a better urban future, which of the statements are correct? UN Habitat has been mandated by the UN General Assembly to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities to provide adequate shelter for all. Its partners are either governments or local urban authorities only. UN Habitat contributes to the overall objective of the United Nations system to reduce poverty and to promote access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect because UN Habitat partners not only with national governments and local bodies, but it also partners with state governments and as well as other stakeholders such as private agencies, civil society organizations, etc. So the correct answer is option B, 1 and 3 only. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, write a note on India's higher level institutions tasked to deal with disaster management. The second question, evaluate the propriety of a retired Supreme Court judge being given lucrative postings or appointments by the government immediately after one's retirement. In your opinion, is there a conflict of interest? So kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.